This is why I wear the glasses, because they say, like, it's showtime. I hope people, oh, there we are. It does say we're live.
We're live.
All right. We'll give it a second while I pop it up on here so I can see people's comments.
Good.
Oh, hello, everyone. Welcome in the land of Facebook. If you have gone live and if you're popping on, I'm just trying to get it so I can see comments. But welcome. Come on in. I am your host, Stacy Sher. Oh, there it is. Okay, turn it down so we don't have like. Come on instead I turn it all the way up.
Perfect.
Okay, there we go. All right, so we are live on Facebook. I am super excited. I'm Stacy Sherman, your host of Who Are These Spiritualists, a monthly Lilydale radio show where I have the pleasure of meeting and introducing you to a current day modern spiritualist. We are out there, we exist, we are your neighbors, and I like to talk to people. And today's guest, I don't have to read anymore, so my glasses go up because I can see you, Tiffany. Today's guest on Who Are These Spiritualists is becoming a friend, neighbor, Tiffany Hopkins. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks, Stacy. It's so good to be here. Hi, everybody.
They're all checking in and coming in. So I always like to start off. First of all, before we get started into the interview process, I do want to just send some hearts and shout outs to some of our past guests and spiritualists who have been on the show or that I know that are living in that heavily flooded area in North Carolina, Tennessee, all of that from that hurricane in Florida. We're thinking of you and we're sending a lot of positive thoughts your way so you guys can get your power back on and get back to whatever the new norm is going to be. So we're thinking of you and sending you those thoughts and prayers and good vibes. But speaking of good vibes, Tiffany has great vibes. I've been getting to know her all summer. So I'm super, super excited to talk to her. And I'm going to learn a lot with you tonight because we talk about coffee and we talk about dogs and we do talk about some spiritualist history, but I haven't talked to you about Tiffany.
Yes, we will have fun.
So Tiffany, the first question that I have for every guest is, how did you find spiritualism or how did spiritualism find you?
Well, we can start with both have happened to me. So I was born into a spiritualist family. But through my stepfather, or I call him my bonus dad because he has been around since I was about 4. So his mother came to Lilydale all her entire life because her mother and her grandmother got a house here in around 1910. So here in Lilydale.
Oh, really? In Lilydale.
Yes. So my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandmother bought this house, and they lived in Perry, which is a couple hours away. They'd ride horse and buggy here until they got a car. And actually my great-grandmother was the first woman with a driver's license in Wyoming County, which I love those little facts. Yes, and that will come into play when we talk about spiritualist history. But so my grandmother grew up here. My father grew up, or my bonus dad, I'm going to call him my dad the whole time. So, but I bring up that fact because it's not blood. And a lot of people talk about things being passed down through blood. And I think it's a lot more than that. But my dad grew up coming here every summer. They didn't live here full time. They lived in Rochester. Actually, my grandparents and my dad and his 2 siblings grew up coming here every year. My dad didn't end up being religious, but he grew up spiritualist. So he's very philosophical and had that very expansive mindset. And I grew up in a house with neither of my parents necessarily being religious, but my dad especially just having a very spiritualist mindset. I didn't really know that as a kid. I did go to spiritualist church with my grandmother. I came here to Lilydale because my uncle and his family lived in the house I'm in right now until 1998. So I knew of it, but like as an adult, it didn't like sink into my brain. at all. And I was really into tarot, and I did studying a lot of like earth-based wisdom, and was like really into my spirituality. And was living in New York City working with a big tech company, and was really tired of living in the city. I'd taken a job so that I could pay off my student debt, and I'd done that, and I really wanted to move back to the country. And I was at my aunt was getting remarried. I was at her wedding, and my cousin was talking about the grandmother's cottage that she had lived in as a kid. They moved out of in 98, and it had been empty ever since. And she was like, I am so tired of paying the taxes on this place that is in such bad shape. We can't even stay there. I'll never be able to finish fixing it up. I'm just going to let them repossess it. And I was like, well, wait a minute. How much are these taxes, and what needs to be done? And she's like, it's not livable. It's a disaster. The taxes ended up being less than 1 month's rent for me. So I was like, I'll cover the taxes and we'll just figure it out from there. And within 2 months, I'd quit my job, broken up with my boyfriend, left my house, and moved to this ramshackle, empty for 20 years cottage. And that's where I became reacquainted with spiritualism as an adult. And I will stop the story for a minute because that was a long story. And the next, that was 6.5 years ago. So those next 6.5 years is when I really became acquainted with it. But the story leading up is always kind of a fun one.
Oh my gosh, there's so much information right now. Like compute. I love it. I love it. I first want to just say totally dig the whole like dad of the heart. I'm the same way. I think a lot of us now, we have these huge blended families or choice families, and how wonderful. That was one. Two, I love the fact that it literally was hovering around you pretty much all of your life, but not necessarily because, Tiffany, you bring a super good point. For some of us, like my grandmother, my great grandmother, all church bound every Sunday. It was churches. It was this, it was that, practicing a religion was, very kind of formatted, where I feel like my parents, your parents, ourselves, we're starting to look at, this idea of religion, spirituality, growth as a more of a organic kind of lifestyle versus a constant, continuous same thing. So I love how this is. Oh my gosh. I love how this is all this is just a great, and then here you are. So you were aware of the philosophy kind of spiritualism and at least some of the stuff.
Yeah. Without, I look back now that I've learned a lot about spiritualism. I'm like, it shaped myself so much. And anybody who was raised by somebody of a religion not practicing the religion would say that, right? Like if you're Jewish and you're raised by a Jewish family but they're not practicing, you're still going to have tons of mindset and values and all these things that you're getting from the religion, and maybe you're just not practicing. So it makes sense, I guess. I just didn't think about it. And so then when I started to learn about it, I was like, oh, okay. Oh, wow. I get this stuff. Yeah.
Connect the dots, right? Connect.
So,
all right. So you take over rent payments, you move, you sell everything. You're now in a house in Lilydale, and God bless you, because I'm going to tell people, if you've been to Lilydale, you understand either you buy a house that is completely habitable, or you buy a house that's completely inhabitable and you have to make it habitable. So what are some of your first things or experiences coming to Lilydale, being in this house, that then drew you further into identifying as a spiritualist?
Yeah. So it was January, by the way. When I pulled up the U-Haul, there was 6 feet of snow. And I had called and had the electricity and the internet turned on because those are important things to me. But there was no heat, there was no water. There was no, even when the water got turned on a few days later, there was no toilet, no sink, no, like everything was broken, no hot water. So that first few days, my sister was with me. She helped me move. And we got here in the beginning of the week, on a Monday or Tuesday, I guess. And we went to church on Sunday at the Lilydale Spiritualist Church. So we'd been here for a few days, and it was warm in there, and it was cozy, and there were candles. And I remember sitting there with my sister and looking at her, and we were both just crying, just bawling, because we were sitting in a church that was saying things that we felt akin to and we believed. And we'd had an experience the summer before where we went to a church up in Canada on the West Coast. My sister's a horse trainer, and so it was like a ranch that she worked on, and it was cowboy church, and it was so wonderful until they started saying things that were very, very not how we believe and not open-hearted. And we looked at each other and we're bawling at that church for a different reason. And so it was so interesting to come here and be like, we felt so at home. And, you know, it was the same thing. She obviously grew up with the same situation where spiritualism was there and kind of hovering around and not really explicit. And we just were like, wow, this is so special. And this is where we come from. And we didn't even realize it. So that was a few days after, I got here. Yeah.
I do love that though, because one of the things that you say that so many of us say that have come to identify as spiritualist is that either through a church, the grounds of a camp, a location of an event that was big in our spiritualist movement, we do feel that vibration or sense of home. Like, wow, like returning back to a knowledge that we somehow misplaced, if you would.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or something like that. So now that, so you're in here 6 years in, like thank goodness you have all, you have hot water now. You have,
very hot water, and I keep it on the hottest.
I love it. I love it. Where did you start then? Like when you started really immersing yourself in spiritualism, going to church or, being lit, we kind of have it lucky. I always say a little bit, I don't believe in luck, but I don't know how else to say that we have it good because we actually live in, a camp where we have active churches or healing services we can go to on any given Sunday or Wednesday. And, it's like we literally walk there, folks. It's so great. Right. But that being said, for those people who can't, what kind of started driving you? Like, was it something at church? Was it a development? Was it healing? What is kind of your first attraction into spiritualism, would you say?
Well, I think it happened on a bunch of levels at the same time. One is I'd been, like I mentioned a little, I'd been doing tarot and developing my spirituality and really seeking, like, and I should say at this point, I moved here when I was in my mid-30s. I can't remember exactly what age. I was really seeking, and I really felt like I was missing something. And so when I look back, I wouldn't have been able to articulate this then, but when I look back, having mediumship, and I immediately, the next day, actually before I went to church, I think I went to a development circle and I went to them every week for the entire first few seasons I was here. So the ability to meet with people and develop mediumship was amazing because it was like, I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff on my own, but I was all of a sudden in community. And then with a church, then again, I was like feeling so alone. And then you go into a building and everybody's there talking about things you care about and, value things you value. So there was like these two prongs of like the religion and the philosophy, but what they both brought me because I'm here is community and around other people, and I wasn't doing it alone. And that was so important for me because like you can seek forever all by yourself and it's just not the same as learning with other people, talking about your beliefs and your explorations with other people and figuring things out together. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk about this separately. Then when I found the kind of science part, which it's hard to separate them fully for me. But once I started, I'm going to call it the history. Once I started researching the history, then I had an intellectual hook, and I was just like, I was, off to the races, because once I could like get into it intellectually, I was like, all right, I got everything I need. This is fascinating.
So. I love that. And I also love that sense of community. I do. I have to say too, I feel it here too. Like it's just, it's so common to be on the porch or be walking your dogs and be like, hey, what do you think about, like, is it concurrent lives, past lives? How many planes of existence are there? Or I love it too. And I won't say any names, but like getting a text like, hey, hey friend, I lost something. What are your, what is your intuition? Like, where do you think it is? Or I love being able to do that so openly and so freely, where you didn't really have that opportunity in the past, developing by yourself or not really having that sense of community. Absolutely. So you talk about the religion aspect. You talk like going to the church, feeling the community. I mean, would you say that I kind of sum that up? Like for you, the religion aspect is the community aspect?
Absolutely. Because I'll say I struggle with the religion part because I wasn't raised religious. And so even talking about being a part of a religion is like, oh, this is still a little awkward for me because I just never envisioned that for myself. But the community, I'm like, wholeheartedly, this is so important. And if it has to be within the bounds of a church, then fine. Sure. But the community is what really matters to me. And like you said, when you started, like, it's really more of a lifestyle,
It really is, isn't it? It is. And it's hard to separate. And you've heard that from other guests, you guys, and maybe yourself, if you're, diving into spiritualism and trying to understand, it's really hard to separate the three, like the definition of spiritualism, right, is the science, philosophy, and religion of continuous life, right? And that belief that we can communicate with those in the spirit world and the information that we receive from those in the spirit world should help us live a better, brighter, happier, lighter life, right? That's kind of that is it for me. But now I want to get into kind of the meat and potatoes a little, because you brought up the science aspect or the history aspect, which is my favorite. So tell me, within all of this, so you're here, you're living, you're fixing up a house, you're developing in circles, you're going to church. How did history make its way into your world?
Well, it couldn't not. I'm a huge nerd. So I immediately started looking into the history. I mean, just the Wikipedia page, I remember before I moved here, and it says radical Quakers were like some of the beginners, like the people who started spiritualism or were involved. And I was like, yes, please. Like, that's something I can get behind. I don't know what it means exactly. But a few years into being here, I read Radical Spirits. That was a big intro for me. And the fact that, such a great book. And like the fact that this religion or spiritualism, I should say, is associated with the early feminist movement, early abolition movements, and a lot of other really important social change movements like social justice movements that was like, absolutely. And because that was one of the reasons my parents weren't religious, is because a lot of times that's not what religions are doing. They're not involved with social justice movements. And that's not always the case. And it's not that it's always been the case, but with spiritualism, it came out of like the same melting pot that things like abolition and votes for women were coming out of. And I'm like, again, this just aligns with what I'm into, and I want to know more. So a friend of mine runs a museum in Brooklyn, and it was the pandemic, and I was like, I want to put together a spiritualist book club. And so I put together 6 months of reading on spiritualism, and was like, I don't know if anybody out there in the world would want to do this. And of course, like tons of people were super into it. And so I had this big group of people, not in Lilydale actually, but all over the world on Zoom. We were all reading all these spiritualist books, and I still look at the book list all the time, and I have all the books and have done a ton more research since, and really, we've nerded out a little bit on some of the 500-page theses that I've read, theses, because it's just there's amazing stuff out there. But it was so fun to talk about this stuff with people it was really new to a lot of them, and some just didn't have community around it. And yeah, so nerded out pretty hardcore 2020 for those first 6 months, just reading every book I could get my hands on.
Everything you could get your hands on, right? Between Abe's books, thrift books, Amazon books, just packages getting delivered.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
I'm a history. I just love the history too. It really, to think about how it formed and started when when you grow up kind of religious, because I was the opposite a little bit, not too religious, but we had to go to church or, to make grandma happy, right? That kind of thing. To think about, and going into a religion where you hear about only, certain people starting it, or one or two people being the epic of the religion, then to see the hundreds, if not thousands, of diverse people coming together to form this spiritualist movement. And I think that's what's really important. I keep calling it a movement because I still feel like it is.
I do too. Personally, I call it a movement. And the part that I feel drawn to, I consider a movement. So I like calling it that too.
So, okay, so let's talk about let's geek out just for a few minutes so we don't lose too many of our listeners. I'm telling you, this is why the history, though, is so exciting, because it really is so much into that, radical, wild time. And I always say you have to go back and think, we have, we grew up with, well, at least for me, I don't know how old I am. I'm somewhere between 47 and 49. Someone will tell me. I'm sure I'm born in 77. Someone do the math. And thank you, listeners, right? We kind of grew up at a time, though, where, women were in the workplace, at least, right? And to think that, go back when this started, women could not even vote, own a home, have any possessions to themselves. So what's kind of who are your favorites in history, or favorite things that you have found?
I've got one particular favorite, and that's Amy Kirby Post, who I really think of as the mother of, or grandmother of spiritualism. And so those who aren't familiar with her, she was a Quaker. She was the radical Quaker, not the only one, but really when they refer to that in the Wikipedia page, they're referring to her and her circles. Grew up Quaker and a little more radical, but went quite radical, and was living in Rochester and started, she was super involved in abolition and present at the first women's suffrage, well, it wasn't suffrage yet, but women's rights conference in 1848, right? The same year that the Fox sisters.
It gives me goosebumps every time you say it. It gives me goosebumps.
Yes. And the thing is, I had been to Quaker meeting before I moved here, and so I know how it works even to this day. And you all just sit in a room quiet, and if you feel called to, you stand up and you say what you're called to say. And so anybody familiar with spiritualism will be like, that sounds familiar. That's like a circle. And so when I started learning about spiritualism, I'm like, oh yeah, this definitely had some Quakers involved, because there weren't a lot of people that did that and that considered it was okay. And so Amy Kirby Post and her circle, social circle, her husband and the people she was involved with in her women's rights and whatnot, knew the Foxes, and in particular Leah Fish Fox, which is the eldest sister of the two younger Fox sisters, who are the Fox sisters. And she was there behind the curtain when they did the first testing in the big theater in Rochester. The two Fox sisters did the big testing, and she was there with
Edgeworth Hall or something, isn't it?
Yes. And she was there all I really imagine, from what I've read, there's an amazing book called Radical Friend about her, and it really gives her life story in a lot of color. and it's not about spiritualism in particular, but she was very involved in it. I really think her circles melding with the Fox sisters is really what brought the tone to the early spiritualist movement, with the really important about people's rights, individuals' rights of all genders and all races and all of this, as well as the actual practice, like, of how we're going to do this. Because the Fox sisters, they weren't sitting in a circle, right? They were receiving information, but the way circles developed really is a kind of how Quakers run their religious practice. So I really think the two melded, and in reality, actually, Amy Kirby Post's husband was more into spiritualism than Amy, but
Yeah,
I, of
Isaac,
course,
right.
just love her. Yeah, Isaac was the one that was really, really into it, so he might have been a little more involved, but the two of them, I don't know. Sorry, that was a lot of geeking out, but
Totally, I love it though.
mean,
But you know what? You're so right, Tiffany, on so many levels of that too, because and then those home circles, right? The circles, the
yeah,
development circles, the home circles that started to come out of that time were all sorts of different things, from trance mediumship to evidential mediumship to healing to inspired speaking to just a plethora of information. And here's the funny thing, if you think about it, and I think this often, like, to be a fly on the wall, right? Do you know, they were rubbing elbows with some of the most greatest leaders, teachers, preachers of that time period. Like, no
absolutely.
one really didn't go to a circle. You always knew someone knew of the medium sitting down. It's like how Morris Pratt formed, right? He just showed up at a circle that his mom was going to, because that's what we did, in the evenings. And think about all that stuff being created from those circles. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, geeked out too. Okay. So great history. Good job. I love it. Yeah, I think of her as the mother too of, spiritualism. She really protected and pushed those Fox sisters
Yes.
to, like, help them. And I think that's
Yep.
really, fantastic. But all right. So as we move through time, we're coming back to Tiffany, living in Lilydale, becoming a spiritualist. What are you currently now doing, working on, developing, moving through all that? Where are you now, Tiffany, and what's going on in your life as a spiritualist?
So let's see where to start. I'm gonna tell one story and then come back and finish it up with to get us right here. Is I studied cognitive science in my undergrad. I also studied digital art and technology stuff, but I have always been very interested in the brain and how we think and how we have consciousness. And after I went crazy on history, I started getting really into the science, like the hard science of what's happening to us when we are mediums, and started researching what was going on. Where you can. It's very hard to research. Not a lot of people are researching it. But what I started looking into was a lot of other cognitive science and current studies, in particular, about how we are processing information around us and without our conscious thought. And so there's a lot of studies of, like, the nervous system and what's happening in our bodies that we don't have conscious control or understanding of. And there's a lot of science these days that says, yeah, there's a lot going on that we're basically reading the space around us and the people around us all the time below our level of consciousness, and it dictates our nervous system and our behaviors. And as I started researching this, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I think in a few years, science will be able to show that the stuff we're doing is part of our natural biology. And, they're not necessarily saying this, that it's psychic or it's dead people or any of this, but I think science and neuroscience in particular are really heading towards a place where we're going to have a lot more understanding of what's going on. And so I got really into researching all of that. And meanwhile, so there's like one little side thing. And the one thing I feel like is missing from the name, the spiritualist definition of science, philosophy, and religion is art. And the other thing I've been doing a lot of is using mediumship for artistic purposes. And so I went to Fellowships of the Spirit, which is outside of Lilydale Gates, and I did their 2-year prophecy and spiritual healing course. And my thesis for that was about channeling for creative purposes. And I developed a class from that called Mediumship for Creativity. And I did that for several years on Zoom. And then I was like, I should write this down. So I wrote it down, and then I was like, this isn't enough. And so I started writing more, and I started writing about the history and started writing about the science stuff that I was just talking about. And I eventually wrote a whole book. And I just really finished it like a couple weeks ago. And I found an agent and I found a publisher. And it is right now, it's with the editor being edited, and then it will be designed and then proofread and copyright and all these things. And next June, I'll have a book coming out. It's called Beyond, Living Person's Guide to the Dead. And it's just my approach to mediumship, this story of moving to Lilydale, my thoughts on the science, my thoughts on the history. So right now I'm really focused on finishing that, because what I want to do is like what we just, this conversation, I want people to be able to read it, because I'm a reader. And as I got into spiritualism and mediumship in particular, I found it really hard to find books that had this sort of information. There's like history books, and then there was like not as much that had like the science and the philosophy. Like I wanted something, a little nerdy. Yeah. So I wrote something a little nerdy.
I cannot wait. I am so excited for that. That is, and it's called Beyond. Say the whole title again, one more time.
Beyond, a Living Person's Guide to the Dead.
Love it. Love it. And I love that you are incorporating art and science, the mind science. I always like I always say the KISS method, and it's keep it simple spiritualist.
I don't
know whoever screwed it up in a different way, but I don't like that way. I like this way.
Need that.
But I love that, for me, one of the things that I've always heard from spirit, either from a medium that I was just sitting with in a circle, to Maurice Barbanel when he channeled, to Seth talks, to Esther, everything you hear is that nothing is separated. Like separation is the biggest illusion of life there is. But yet we need to somehow separate the mind with the heart. Like, and now I feel like there's just going to be so much in these next, who knows, dozen years or so, or, a couple decades, that's going to bring a spirituality and science are just going to start just blending more and more and more.
Yep. The kind of approach I use I call my mediumship approach, like what I teach in the book. Like I give a like step-by-step how to start doing mediumship. Awesome. I call it embodied mediumship, because I agree completely. It's like, it's all of us. We need our whole being to do this. Yes. And the separation is an illusion.
It is. So cool. I can't wait now. Now I want to take your class too. Like I want to like do mediumship for art. I do it in a weird kind of way, my own way that I just kind of made, because I'm an aura reader, but see, not your traditional aura reader. Like I read Ted Andrews. I took classes where you had to stare at your hand against a white wall until you could start to see the colors. And I never saw a color. And I just thought, there's just no way I can read auras. Like, I don't know what they're talking about. It didn't fit for me. And I heard clairaudiently in my head, well, yeah, you don't see them. You feel them first.
Uh-huh.
And once I allowed myself to realize that I'm feeling energetic auras from people, from places, from trees to animals to whatever, then it's like in my mind's eye, they became visual.
Yeah.
But I love playing with like because I'm a very bad drawer. I'll tell you that right now.
Me too, actually.
But I love to do collage, like, like
Mhm.
cut pictures and magazines and use, things that are just going to get thrown out. So I love to
Yeah.
make people's auras look like a collage of
Oh, I
everything that
love
I
that.
feel about them. Isn't that fun?
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Your book's coming out. Are you teaching online at all? Or how do people find you, Tiffany? Like if they're like, oh my God, I need to order her book, pre-order her book, or get in
Yes.
contact with her, or, how do people get a hold of you?
So I the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, Normalize Talking to the Dead, which we didn't talk about this. You actually did a little bit because the beauty of Lilydale is that it's a place where you don't have to do the whole like preamble, and like everybody here is like, yeah, we believe, we don't have to like explain ourselves that we're, into mediumship. And so what I wish for others is they had that same, I wish everybody had that same place where it just feels comfortable and you don't have to. I always feel like I have a song and dance I have to do in the real world when I tell them I'm a medium. And that's why my organization is called Normalize Talking to the Dead, because I want it to be normal for everybody to do. I think it's normal. I think it's something
Absolutely.
we can all do, and it's part of human nature. So normalizetalkingtothedead.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. And I don't have a class yet, but I think I'll be doing one with Lilydale next summer. And so maybe I was thinking I should do one online with Lilydale this winter. So
Ooh,
go to the
fun.
website and you can sign up for my email list and I'll send info that way.
Perfect. Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
And hi, everybody. I see all your hellos, and it's great to see you all on. Jan, Sonia, Julie, Dale, all good. Sharon, everyone. So good to see you, and so good that you spent some time with us this evening. I also want to say, too, that Tiffany hosts her own Lilydale radio show. And
Mhm.
there's past episodes that you can find on YouTube or Facebook. Go back into the video content. And I can't remember what day your show is. When is your
Yeah.
show?
So the show is on the 11th, and I think I'm gonna try to do a bonus episode on the 22nd every month at 6 p.m. Eastern on Lilydale Radio. I'll also put it on Spotify, the recording, because I've had a podcast on there for a few years, but I'm changing the name to Beyond because it's a little simpler. And so you'll be able to listen there as well. But yeah, come to the Lilydale Radio live 6 p.m. October 11th will be the first show.
Ooh,
Thank you
10,
for
11.
reminding me. I forgot about that.
Listen, I have to do that too. And I have to remind you all that there's quite a few shows on Lily Dale Radio with
Mhm.
other hosts, all pertaining to living spiritually, mediumship, healing, those kinds of things. So I definitely, and I have to tell you, it's so refreshing, Tiffany, to hear you talk about. I love every time I hear normalizing talking to the dead, because so many people think what we do is supernatural, paranormal, but
Mm.
really it's just normal. Like
It's just
it's just normal.
Mhm.
And I think it's normal because of spiritual laws. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, and energetic laws and natural laws. It's just a normal thing that we all do and have the ability to do. We're lucky enough though to have the family that kind of held that house for you, right? Held that space for you to
That's right. Yep.
and
Exactly.
do what you do, which is so awesome. Again, we are live now and we see all your comments. I don't see anyone having a question, so we must have covered, some really good ground here. I do want to go back. One question though I forgot that like is being pinged in my head. Besides radical friend, you said
Mhm.
you're a reader, and I always know that a lot of my listeners are readers too. Is there any one or two particular books that stand out in your mind that, of course, Beyond, that book is going to stand out in our mind a lot once we get a chance to read it.
Yes.
But is there any other book that you maybe have read recently, or that was, one of your books that you had for your book talk that you really felt can help explain to people who we are and what we do?
Yeah, I've got two. One is not a spiritualist book and one is. So let me start with the not a spiritualist book. It's called The Flip by Jeffrey Kripal. And the reason it's really interesting, he's a I guess you'd say a philosopher or a um an academic in religious studies. And The Flip is about how people experience going from not believing to believing, to put it really broadly. And I think it's a really great bellwether of what you were talking about how the sciences really are going to start
Mhm.
understanding that anomalies are part of life, and that they're normal. And so I think that's a great book for people who are still grappling with what is this, because I still grapple with it all the time, because I have this rational mind that's like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And then the rest of me is
How
like,
is
but
that
look at what just
possible?
happened. Yeah. So I love that book, The Flip by Jeffrey Kripal. I have to try not to recommend Radical Friend again, because I loved it so much. Like, speed read that. Um,
I love
it
that.
was incredible. And I also, of course, think Radical Spirits is an incredible beginning, if you're getting into the history. And it just sort of takes I mean, it's very academic, but I think it's more readable than most academic books.
Mhm.
And then the last one, again, I guess it isn't totally spiritualist, but it's called Talking or Speaking to the Dead in Early America. So it's another sort of nerdy history book by a history professor actually in Buffalo, and I found it really helpful for understanding our like U.S. American culture and how it prepared um, us for spiritualism to emerge. And so it's like talking about the puritanical roots and like the pre Second Great Awakening. Not to get
Yeah.
super nerdy, but like the before spiritualism stuff,
Yeah.
how it prepared us because of changes in Catholicism and Christianity and Protestantism. And so I think that's a great, again, a little academic, but a great read of like, why does this stuff matter and why was it missing in our culture and why do still in our culture in some senses. So.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's
Awesome.
by Eric Seaman. I forgot the author's
I
name is
feel like
Eric
I
Seaman.
might own that one. I have to check now. Now I'm like,
Probably.
I have to check. Do I have that one or not? Well, again, Tiffany, thank you so much for being a guest on our show tonight. This was great. And I just want to point out a few people I love. Dale says, I'm a spiritualist with a science mind. Absolutely. Like we can be those kinds of people. We
Yeah.
can absolutely,
Mhm.
and that's what's so great. And then we have the people who are just like, well, that's okay, it doesn't matter, I'm so great. We love them all. Like we just like
Yeah,
embrace all the
absolutely.
information. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I actually am gonna pop on one other question or comment that was said for Sonia. She said, I consider a lot what I do spirit directed art, and I think that we are inspired by spirit
Yes. Me too.
probably a lot more than what we think. So
I think so
all
too.
right. Well,
Yeah.
Tiffany, make sure to check out our show, you guys, October 11th, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here where you're watching us now, Facebook, and YouTube, Insta. I don't know if it goes on to Instagram, does it? Yeah. Okay. I'm like,
I think it will,
okay.
if I can get the wires to cross correctly.
We'll do that. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being on. Everybody, I look forward to seeing you next month. I have a guest coming all the way from the West Coast via StreamYard, a good friend named Justin Crockett. He's also an astrologer, and he too is writing a book, but based upon, oh, Tiffany, you're going to love this. Based upon the charts, he has done astrological charts for past spiritualist mediums to current spiritualist mediums and is finding a connection in
Oh
astrology.
my god. Yes, please. I can't wait.
We're going to geek out again next
Yeah.
month. So thanks, everyone. Have a
Amazing.
great night. Don't forget to check out all of Lily Dale's programming and online courses. You just might happen to find Tiffany's online course or in-person course next year. So everyone, thanks again. Have a good evening.